think that there's been continuing agreement among the NATO allies and the other contributing nations to the ISAF coalition, beginning with the Lisbon summit in November 2010, when the basic strategy of transition was adopted, which envisaged a step-by-step process of handing over responsibility for the security of the country to the Afghans themselves. So at the Chicago summit in May of 2012, there was a reaffirmation of this strategy and an agreement on sort of how it's going to play out over the remaining period till the end of 2014. Part of this was agreement that at some point in 2013, the last of the 5 tranches of provinces that are being handed off to the Afghans would take place, and so 100% of Afghan territory would be under the lead responsibility of the Afghan security forces. This doesn't mean that NATO's combat role ends at that point, because lead responsibility isn't the same thing as full responsibility in the terms of the trade, and so there'll still be a combat role for NATO supporting the Afghans probably till the very end of 2014. So what was decided at Chicago is that the combat mission would end at the end of 2014 as planned, but the NATO would start a new mission focusing on training, advising, and assisting the Afghan security forces. The basic message being they'll be standing up for themselves, but they won't be standing alone. The international community is not going to make the same mistake that it made in the early 90s when the Soviets pulled out and Afghanistan disintegrated into a hotbed of terrorism and fell under Taliban rule. Now the Afghans have a lot of responsibility themselves in terms of responsible governance, rule of law, stamping out corruption. And of course in 2014 they have very important elections, and it'll be a test for their very fragile democracy, whether they can have a peaceful transfer of power, which I think will be key to maintaining the support of the international community and continuing to win the hearts and minds of the Afghan people. I think that Afghanistan obviously is top of the list in the sense that NATO has to finish the job. It's been a decade-long investment with a lot of blood and treasure expended for the sake of stabilizing that poor country. But it's based on a recognition that our security ultimately depends on Afghanistan not becoming a safe haven for terrorists again. Beyond Afghanistan, of course, NATO needs to equip itself for the future, and I think the Chicago summit was very important in setting in motion a decade-long effort to build the capabilities NATO will need, even given the fiscal austerity that everyone is having to endure, so that by the end of this decade, we're equipped with the capable, flexible, deployable forces that we need to deal with contingencies that we can't predict now, but we know they're going to happen. I think the idea that NATO is going to have a long vacation is probably naive, given the volatility and unpredictability of the international system. I think the other big challenge for NATO is to develop the partnership strategy to its fullest. There's a lot of countries in Europe, including EU countries like Finland, Sweden, and Austria. We have partners in the Asia-Pacific region, led by Australia, but also the Koreans, the New Zealanders, the Japanese, who want to have a deeper relationship with NATO. And we've promised a lot, but we haven't yet delivered. So we have to do that. And of course, the relationship with Russia. Despite 15 years of effort since the signing of the NATO-Russia Founding Act in 1997, and now 10 years since the NATO-Russia Council was established, we still don't have the strategic partnership with Russia that we would like. Still a lot of suspicion on both sides, though I think mainly on the Russian side, still views NATO as an adversary and believes that initiatives like our missile defense system, which is oriented exclusively toward threats from the Middle East and generally from outside of Europe, no matter what we say, no matter how much we present the scientific facts, they still think it's about them and that it's a threat to them. So that may be the biggest challenge of all, especially with Vladimir Putin back in power, who tends to have a very skeptical view of NATO. but still I think that there's so many areas of shared interest that we could build upon that I haven't given up hope. Yes, indeed. When we think about capabilities, it's not just the traditional capabilities of military hardware and training and readiness of our troops, but now NATO is focusing on dealing with these new threats to the global commons, such as cyber attacks. And we took initiatives at the Lisbon Summit, which are, I think, on track, including setting up a NATO Cyber Incident Response Center, which enables us to respond quickly when our own networks are attacked, but also to share expertise and best practices with the member states so that they can better protect themselves against cyber attacks. I think energy security is another one of these new security challenges that NATO is beginning to address, both in a very practical way, ensuring that our energy pipelines, power grids are hardened against potential external threats, but also thinking strategically about what does NATO need to do to contribute to freedom of navigation, the free flow of energy supplies, to promote diversity in the market and reducing overdependence on any one source. These are issues that don't fall exclusively in NATO's domain, but are increasingly recognized as part of the security agenda that NATO has to address.